and Le'iloi Nishmat, a very special person. So I'm going to begin right away with firstly sending the makorot on chat so that you'll have them, in addition to sharing them on the screen. One moment. Okay, now you all have them being sent slowly as a chat while I also share it. Okay. Okay, let's change a moment. Share. Oh, there it is. Sorry, 1 second. Very strange. Okay, here we are. Okay, so I have to fix this. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, we're going to begin. Firstly, as I mentioned, it's a very special shiur. Le'iloi nishmat Rav Zilka Shmuel ben Rabbi Yitzchak Tzvi HaKohen Zichrono Levracha. And Sarah, this is Sarah's father, and who is dedicating the shiur. So thank you. And as I was even putting the name in, again, brings back all the memories of each time saying it in Bella's home. And his yahrzeit, I believe, is tomorrow. Is that right? So very special, and therefore, and I decided for a very creative Tanakh and Talmud shiur this morning. And what do I mean by that? And let's take a look. I'm going to look at the story. I'm just trying to close this. I don't know how to close this. Nope. Uh-oh. Okay, 1 second. I have to bring this back up. Does this happen? Okay, I'm just going to download. Okay, I'm going to bring it up like this. I believe this. Okay, 1 moment. Okay, I'm bring it up as a Word file instead. Okay, still figuring these things out. Okay, let's take a look together at Eliyahu Hanavi. And now, again, we know this, and if you remember, I mentioned a few times that perhaps more than any other figure in Tanakh who is going to be perpetuated and incorporated in numerous stories of Chazal, and we find Eliyahu Hanavi. And truth be told, that makes a lot of sense, considering that Eliyahu Hanavi never really died. So of course, out of all the different possibilities of characters who are going to reappear from Tanakh in times of Talmud and in Talmudic stories, it definitely makes a lot of sense that it's Eliyahu. What I'd like to really focus on, though, today is not just the character of Eliyahu, but believe it or not, how places that we find in Tanakh are also going to be perpetuated by Chazal. Now, here what I mean is not, we see, Abraham in this week's Parsha goes from the areas of Shechem to Beit El and Hebron. So obviously we're going to see these places mentioned in Talmudic times as well. What I mean instead is how Chazal and just assume that we all know Tanakh, and therefore, not only are the ideas and concepts, but actual halachot are going to be built off of different understandings of Tanakh. Now, as amorphous as that sounds, here's the proof. The Gemara Mesachat Shabbat, Daf Lamed Daled, tells us, and how are we going to understand this very also amorphous time period that we call Bein Hashmashot? And we call it Bein Hashmashot, that literally means in between the suns, because it's not day and it's not night. So what is it? So Chazal, instead of just saying it's no time, and it's this absence of time, again, give it this new category called Bein Hashmashot. And this is, again, Misha Tishka Hachama. It's after the sun has set. But how do I know exactly what it is? Instead of just, as we said, a negative definition, they're going to try to give it a positive definition. Meaning they're going to try to qualify when this time that we call even twilight, and which is so unclear, which is so uncertain. So they say as follows. Again, when is this twilight? Kozman mipnei mizrach madimim. From when the sun sets, as long as the eastern side, and from the opposite of where it's setting, is reddened by the light of the sun. But once if the lower segment of the sky has already turned, again, a silver and a silverish color, meaning it's already dark, it's losing its color, but the upper part has not yet lost its color, that's twilight, meaning there still is literally a little bit of light left. But again, if the upper part has lost its color and its color equals out of the lower one, then it's too dark. You can't necessarily tell the difference between it. That's already considered night according to Rabbi Yehuda, which means according to Rabbi Yehuda, again, obviously it's related based on colors, right? Meaning it's still a visual. So Rabbi Yehuda takes into account, again, we'll call it even a visual effect, or he's using, again, the time itself, the time of what's going on in the sky. Comes along Rabbi Nechemia, and he offers a remarkably creative definition of Bein Hashmashot. He says, you want to understand time. Time isn't understood by looking, by the visual of the sun. Time is understood by activity, meaning the passing of time. So the time that it takes, he says, when is Bein Hashmashot? It's the time that it takes for a person to walk half a mil after the sun has set. He says, just like walk, and then you'll know the half a mil walk later, it's already Teta Kochabim. Basically, the time that it takes, that's this Bein Hashmashot. Now, at the same time, you're all supposed to say that's very subjective, because the time that it takes me to walk a Chatzi Mil may be very different than the time that it takes Rosalind to walk a Chatzi Mil. Rabbi Yosef says, again, he disagrees. He says, you don't understand. Bein Hashmashot keref ayin. Bein Hashmashot is this blink of an eye. And what does that mean? Zen nechnas v'yotzei. Again, night, again, or the day leaves, and the night comes in right away. You can't calculate. You can't walk a Chatzi Mil. You're going to miss it. And you can't even wait to look at the sun. And according to him, then it's almost like makes me think in Harry Potter, platform 9 3/4, right? It doesn't really exist, right? It's right in between somewhere. And you're going to miss it. You're going to miss the train, really, if you try to define it any other way. Well, let's go back to Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia wanted to use time. So what time did he say? As we said, this is so subjective, right? You're trying to give an objective time to an amorphous term, but even in your definition itself is unclear and subjective, because you said, the duration that it takes for a person to walk half a mil after the sun sets. Amma Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina is going to come to explain Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia, he understands. Rabbi Nechemia is so subjective. You want to understand it? Yaniach chama berosh hakarmel v'yered v'yitbol bayam v'ya'aleh. All you have to do, he says, you want to know the measure of Rabbi Nechemia's twilight? This is what you should do. And what Chatzi Mil? He says, I'm telling you, again, here is an objective Chatzi Mil. Leave the sun, he says, at the top of Har Carmel, and meaning so that you're going to start off by Rosh HaKarmel, at the time, basically, of sunset, meaning that someone who's on the seashore will see the top of Har Carmel when there still is sun. And then, so the amount of time that it takes you from sunset, basically, to walk down Har Carmel and v'yered v'yitbol bayam, and immerse yourself in the water. You know that Nachal Kishon, again, starts right by that area. And then come back, emerge from that. Now the question is, why? Why does Rabbi Hanina go out of his way to tell you that Rabbi Nechemia is referring to going down a mountain, dipping in the water, and coming back up? But he doesn't just say any mountain, right? Choose any mountain. He says Dafka Har Carmel. Now some of you are saying because he needs some type of objective altitude. But the problem is that Har Carmel, we know, is not one mountain. It's an entire mountain range. So what does Rabbi Hanina mean? What's he trying to tell us about Bein Hashmashot? And just as a proof that he definitely does not mean literally, but rather he's telling us to have a shiur like we're having this morning. He basically is saying, everyone, make sure that you have a Tanakh open when you learn Gemara. Make sure that you understand the continuation of the stories of Tanakh. And why is that? And here's a proof. The continuation talks about Rabbi Chia also, who says, you want to see the bear of Miriam, and then also Yale Rosh Carmel, V'yitzvei v'yireh min kfar bayam, Zomi Bei Rashel Miriam, which just tells us, and according to Rab, Ma'ayan hamitaltel tahor, and that bear of Miriam was actually, it wasn't a particular source of water. It went with Am Yisrael throughout the 40 years of the Midbar. So you can't see it from one particular place. In other words, Rabbi Chia's statement is basically telling us, and to understand Rabbi Hanina, then you have to appreciate he's speaking metaphorically. He's not speaking literally, just like the Be'er of Miriam. Well, that being the case, and if it's really symbolic, then what does Rabbi Hanina mean? He's saying, you want to understand Bein Hashmashot, you want to understand this amorphous time period? So now he's telling us, understand Rabbi Nechemia, who gives a geographic distance as the distance from Har Carmel. So now we understand this a little more. What Rabbi Hanina is trying to tell us is go back to the story of Har Carmel. What is the story of Har Carmel? It's a story of Malachim Aleph, Perek Yud Chet. What happens in that story? Here's our Tanakh component. We know that Eliyahu Hanavi, first time we see him on the scene, declares a famine, right? And Hashem says, Lech nizeh, Eliyahu, like you have to be rehabilitated as a Navi, leave the people, right? So Eliyahu is going to be provided for, but at the same time, learn how to be a little more sensitive to Am Yisrael, as a famine is going to ensue for the next 3 years. And then after 3 years, Hashem tells Eliyahu, time to go back. Go to Achav and tell him there's going to be rain. And Eliyahu is so upset. What do you mean? There hasn't been a change. The people are still worshiping Avodah Zarah. Now I'm supposed to just give them rain. So Eliyahu first meets up with Obadiah, and he tells Obadiah, and you tell Achav, and I'm not going to give him rain right away. Tell him to meet me with all of his false prophets, with his Nebi'ei Habal. Tell him to meet me by Har Carmel. And the question is, why does Eliyahu say Har Carmel? Right? Eliyahu is a Nabi for Achav, who's in Emek Yisrael, which is the central northern region. Why does he tell him go all the way to Haifa, right? Go all the way to the western coast. So it seems that Har Carmel, he's telling him, go to the border between the culture of Yisrael and the culture of Tzor and Sidon. For after all, Achab has married the princess Izebel, the notorious princess of Tzor and Sidon, and the people have adopted the culture of Lebanon at the time, the Sidonite culture. So Eliyahu is basically saying, let's go to Har Carmel, let's go to the border zone, wherein you're going to have to choose, because what is he going to tell them? Ad matai atem poschim al shtei hasi'ifim. How long are you going to straddle between these two posts? How long are you going to straddle between, like literally hedging your bets, on one hand on Hashem, on the other hand also worshiping Avodat HaBaal? And that seems to be why he takes them to Har Carmel. And that's where what is going to happen? He brings and all the Nebi'im al Har Carmel. Eliyahu approaches the people and says, Ad matay atem poschim al shtei hasifim? Im Hashem Elokim, if you really believe Hashem is the most powerful God, l'chu acharav, follow him. V'im habal, but if you believe it's Baal, he can't even say Im habal Elokim, l'chu acharav, V'lo anu ha'am oto davar. And the people didn't answer him anything, but other Parshanim explain they didn't answer oto davar. Some people yelled out Hashem, another yelled out Baal, meaning you really feel the schism and both within the people and this internal dialectic that they're all feeling. You see, I'm the only one really allegiant to God. All of these Nevi'ei Habal, there are 450 of them. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a contest. They can choose which cow they want first, which bull, and we're each going to build a mizbeach, and let's see who God answers. And ve'esh lo asim, no fire, and we're each going to call out ukratem pasuk hatale b'shem Elohechem, v'ani akra b'shem Hashem, v'yah Elokim asher yana ba'esh hu Elokim. Whichever God answers with fire, then we'll know that He's the God. And the people answer tov hadavar. So he tells the Nevi'ei Habal, you choose first. You're the majority, and they take a power, and they call out in the name of Baal. Take a look at the duration of time from the morning all the way to the afternoon, saying, Anenu, Anenu, Habal, Anenu. Ve'ein kol ve'ein onem. But there's no answer. Vayipaschu. And sure enough, they straddle. Ala mizbech asher asad. This was an ancient form of idolatry, and literally skipping over the threshold. Vayhibit saharayim. Right? Now it's already, it says that they were calling until the Tzaharayim. So now it's after the Tzaharayim. Basically, it's late afternoon. Vayahatel behem Eliyahu. And Eliyahu is now starting to tease them. Vayamar karu b'kol gadol ki Elokim hu. You mean you have to scream? This is, a powerful God. Call louder. It must be kitziach v'siglo, that your God is in the middle of a conversation. And or v'chi derechlo, maybe he's distracted. Maybe he's sleeping and you have to wake him up. And sure enough, that's what they do. And you're supposed to be laughing here. And now they're engaged in the ancient form of literally of scraping their flesh. And that was seen as a form of submission before God. And they're literally drawing blood. And now this is already after the late afternoon. Vayitnavu ad lalot hamincha. They're engaged in their prophetic acts all the way until the late afternoon. This is mincha. Ve'ein kol ve'ein oneh ve'ein kasher. But again, no answer. So Eliyahu says, okay, come to me. And he rebuilds a destroyed mizbeach. And he not only rebuilt it, but he places water, right? Different troughs of water all around, right, decreasing the chances of the fire, and to sure enough to consume the korban. And what else does he do? He takes 12 avanim, representing rebuilding Am Yisrael. And now vahi ba'alot hamincha vayagash Eliyahu hanavi vayomar Hashem Elokei Abraham Yitzchak Yisrael hayom yivada ki ata Elokim b'Yisrael v'ani avdecha. And now it's going to be known that Hashem is God. Again, uvidvarcha asiti et kol hadvarim ha'ila aneni Hashem aneni. This, as we know, is the basis for our slicha of saying aneni v'yadu ha'amazeh ki ata Hashem Elokim b'ata hasivot et libam achoranit. Hashem, come on, just like you, and push them afar, you have to bring them back. And so now, batipol ish Hashem v'tochal ha'olah v'tzayitzim v'tavanim v'tafar v'tamayim asher b'tala lichecha. The fire came down, and despite all the water, and it burned up the entire korban. Vayar kol ha'am v'yiplu al pneihem vayamru Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem hu Elokim. Vayamar Eliyahu lahem tifsu et Nevi'ei Habal. Take a look at the next scene. Eliyahu says, that's not enough that you all cry out Hashem Elokim. Go run after all these Nevi'ei Habal, who are now, again, have now been proven false. Ish al yamalit mehem. Don't let any of them get away. V'yipesum. Make sure to catch them. Vayiridem Eliyahu al nachal Kishon. Eliyahu brought them down to a source of water. Vayishchatim sham, and he slaughtered them there. But that wasn't enough. Then Eliyahu tells Achav, you go and eat already, because don't worry, the rains are coming. Kol hamon geshem. Vaya'aleh Achav lechol v'lishdot. Achav goes to eat and drink. Eliyahu ala Rosh HaKarmel. Eliyahu goes back to the top of our Carmel, Vaygar Arza, and he collapses on the floor. Vayasim panav berkav, and he goes back to a fetal position, and he davens, and he waits to see, and is there any cloud? And it takes 7 times until his attendant says, I see a little, literally the size of a palm of the hand. There's a little bit of precipitation coming up from the Mediterranean. He says, excellent. Vayomar alei emor elachav esor v'ared. Go, he says, and tell Achav time to get his chariot, so that the waters, the rain won't catch you. And what do you know, within just a short amount of time, the sky is already like last night we saw, over the course of the late afternoon, full of dark clouds and winds, and now and I love the scene, and it starts pouring rain, and while Achav is riding back to Emek Yisrael in his chariot, Eliyahu, like Superman, is riding next to him, and by foot, by Yaretz Lefnechav Ad Boacha Yisraela. Now notice then what happens over here. And Eliyahu had said to them, you keep going back, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left, meaning how long are you going to straddle like this? And why then does he accuse them of this on Har HaKarmel? We said because Har HaKarmel is also geographically a place of straddling. It's basically it's on the border. But we're going to see in just a moment that Carmel is not just Har HaKarmel. He doesn't just bring them to Har HaKarmel because of its geographic location, but actually because of its, we'll even call it etymological significance, right? Because of how significant it is. So now we understand this a little more. What was Rabbi Hanina telling us about Rabbi Nechemiah? You want to understand what twilight is? You want to understand times that elude you? You want to understand, let's even call it not just times of ambiguity, times of confusion, right? It's not this and not that, right? And we don't know, what is the point? It's not Shkia, it's not Teito Kochavim, it's not Yudalit, it's not Tedvav. What is it? Somewhere in between. And that's why, take a look. And that's why Rabbi Nechemiah says, you want to understand Bein Hashmashot? Go to Har HaKarmel. Go and see that ambiguity in time also exists in place. And Rosh HaKarmel, go back to the scene of Eliyahu. You want to understand Halacha? You want to understand Torah Sheba'al Peh? Go back to Eliyahu. Go back to Har HaKarmel. Har HaKarmel is also a place of ambiguity. It's a place where the people didn't know, should they believe in God or should they believe in Baal? And they come up believing kind of, in Baal. But don't worry, by the end of the scene, there's going to be a resolution. They're going to believe in God, Hashem Hu Elokim. And when does that resolution take place? What do you know? During Bein Hashmashod. How do you know this? Eliyahu starts speaking to them Be'alot HaMincha, meaning after basically Mincha time. And that's what Rabbi Nechemiah meant. Yaniach Chama Berosh HaKarmel. Leave, again, when the sun is basically on the top of Har HaKarmel, that's when Eliyahu started to turn and say, now we're going to clarify this confusion. Now we're going to see who's really the God, Hashem or Baal. And then what does Eliyahu do to clarify it? It's not enough that there's fire. He then goes down all the way to Nachal Kishon, and he literally slaughters the Nibiyei Baal and Nachal Kishon, meaning the imagery is he goes to immerse in the water. By the time you go back up, it's already dark. And Eliyahu was waiting for the rain. By the time you go back up, it's now clarified. And all your confusions have been resolved. Now you know Hashem Hu Elokim. Everyone seeing this? What a brilliant, brilliant terminology that Rabbi Nechemiah is saying. He basically is telling us, okay, I hope you know Tanakh in order to understand this halachic concept of Bein Hashmashot. Bein Hashmashot is not here, not there. So you want a not here, not there story, go to Har HaKarmel. And then you'll understand. And that, there are not clear times, but not to worry. And by the end, it's resolved. By the time you get to Teita Kochavim, by the time you get to Hashem Elokim, by the time you go down the mountain with Eliyahu and back up, it's going to be resolved. So now, again, we appreciate this all the more, right? Eliyahu himself, by the way, is not here, not there. So he goes to a place that's not here, not there, and during a time that's not here, not there. But by the end, it's going to be clarified. So what we discussed, why does he take them to the Carmel? Apparently, because it's not here, not there. It's not fully in the border of Israel. It's not fully on the border of Lebanon. Again, right on the border, a little bit here, a little bit there, like we say about Yerushalayim, Binyamin and Yehuda, like shared property. It's the shared time. But the truth is that even Har HaKarmel is called Carmel because we're going to see, let's take a look at other places in Tanakh, what Carmel actually means. In Sefer Vayikra, the first time that we have Carmel, and that's a skill, Again, anytime we want to understand the definition of a word, we always go back to the first time that it's employed. And sure enough, in the context of a karban mincha, of a flour offering, we don't only bring from fine flour or from processed flour, we bring a mincha at times even from the raw grains. What are examples of raw grains? Aviv is a raw grain, geres is a raw grain, and carmel. So Rashi says, what's carmel? Carmel is a type of grain wherein, and he says it comes from karmale. Why is it? Because the wheat has already ripened. And in other words, it's karmale. It's already ripened, and therefore it's called carmel. In other words, Rashi is explaining that it's already fully ripened, and now it's already bakashin shala. It's already in the straw again to keep it fresh. So Eliyahu brought them to this place called Carmel because apparently that's an area where the wheat is very fresh. Okay, the Yerushalmi says actually, Carmel is not a very fresh grain. On the contrary, it's rach malay, not karmale. Again, it's not fully ripened. It's still soft, and it's not too moist, and it's not too dry. Rather, I feel like Goldilocks. It's just right. It's in between. I mean, it's in its in-between stages. It's not like fully ripened yet. Like I keep thinking of avocados. Every time I think of this, it's not hard and it's not like super soft. It's like right in between. You can still eat it, but that like you can give it another few hours even, and it will be much softer. That's Carmel. It's in an in-between state. So maybe that's why Eliyahu told them go to Hara Carmel, because it's the place of the in-between state of a wheat. Or in Yeshayahu, we hear that it's altogether a different area. He talks about Od Yara Ruach Mimaron Bayam Midbar the Carmel, the Carmel Ya'ar. The Midbar, a place of wilderness, will be transformed to the Carmel, to a place of fruition, and the Carmel even to a Ya'ar, which, as you know, is a place of a lot of forestry, a lot of green. So even according to Yeshayahu, Carmel is an agricultural zone. It's not the wilderness, but it's also not the Ya'ar. It's somewhere in between, like a fruitful area, without being like super duper lush, like Emek Yisrael. And it's a nice area. That's Carmel. So maybe that's why Eliyahu took them to Har Carmel. Not because it's an in-between grain association, but it literally is an in-between geographic and agricultural zone, like in Yirmiyahu as well. V'hinei HaKarmel HaMidbar. The Carmel will be transformed into a midbar, right? Because it's this in-between stage. And just
Sani, is that where we get the idea of the wheat?
Yep, excellent. Take a look at the very next.
That's also in between Mesut Rabim, Mesut Hayachid.
Between, but you don't know that yet. In other words, what do we see in Carmel? A beautiful idea. I know what Carmel is in Tanakh. Carmel in Tanakh is either an in-between grain, an in-between agrarian zone, an in-between border. That's all I know. And that's why Eliyahu takes them there to this in-between zone. But what happens in this in-between zone? In this in-between geographic area, in other words, in the context of ambiguity of place, we also find ambiguity of time. And how do we know that? Not only because each of the stages of the time of the day are mentioned, right? Saharayim, Achar HaTzarayim, Balot HaMincha, Achar HaMincha, and in order to teach us of this transition of time. And that's why Rabbi Nehemiah says, you want to understand clarification of ambiguities? Go to the most ambiguous of scenes in Tanakh. Go to Har HaKarmel, and then go down with Eliyahu, again, when they recognize Hashem Elokim, when they went to Nachal Kishon and immersed and slaughtered all the false prophets, and then go back up. And then your ambiguities will be resolved. So what do Chazal do? Chazal take Rabbi Nehemiah's statement with regard to Bein Hashmashot and the Carmel, and they're now going to tell us, you know what? If Har Carmel is already a place wherein you can understand the ambiguity of time and the transition of time, then let's use the same terminology of Carmel, of this in-between grain, in-between agrarian area, to talk about place in Halacha, not just in Tanakh, in Gemara. Where do we see this? In Masechet Shabbat. And part of the reason why I was so excited to share this together with you is because we're almost finishing Masechet Eruvin. And this idea comes up over and over again with regard to an Eruv, because Mida Oraita, you're not allowed, there are only two zones. based on the Torah law. There's a private domain known as a Reshut HaYachid and a public domain is the Reshut HaRabim, and you're not allowed to, not to transfer objects from one to the other on Shabbat. What about in between zones? They're not totally private and they're not totally public. Perfect. They're the Bein Hashmashot of domains. So what do you think they're going to be called? So Chazal say, Arba Rishuyot LeShabbat. Chazal add two other names. There's Reshut HaYachid and Reshut HaRabim that you know Midoraita. Now we're going to call the in-between zone the Carmelite. And now we're going to call the completely exempted zone a Makom Tur, like an airspace. Will be a Makom Tur, a place that you're exempted and there's no problem, and carrying from one to the other. The Ezohi, what's the Carmelite? Inna lo Reshut HaYachid v'lo Reshut HaRabim. It's neither Reshut HaYachid nor a Reshut HaRabim. And sure enough, the Yerushalmi, not the Babli, the Yerushalmi explains and why Carmelite from Carmel, Rachmale eno lo lach lo yavesh ela benoni. And that's exactly the point. And the Carmelite is somewhere in between. The Carmelite is not a public domain nor a private domain. It's Hara Carmel. It's Eliyahu's ambiguities. And just as we go back to the story of Hara Carmel, and we see that it began mi'abokar ad hatzarayim, v'hi b'tzarayim, v'hi kabor hatzarayim, la'lo tamincha, v'hi ba'lo tamincha. Where are we now? It's Shkia time. And now there's going to be Bein Ha'arbayim, or as Targum Onkelos explains, Bein Shmashaya, Bein Hashmashot. In this very unclear time, Eliyahu goes down, slaughters the Nevi'ei Baal, dips in the Har HaKishon, in Nachal Kishon, so to speak, and then goes back up to Har HaKarmel. And now it's Tzeitzat Chavim. From a Carmelite, you can go to Reshut HaYachid, you can go to Reshut HaRabim, but you want to understand the Carmelite? Go back to the story of Eliyahu. Go back to the story of confusions. Because just like you can have a Carmel or a Carmelite, an in-between zone and place, and just like you can have Bein Hashmashon in time, you could also have it or experience it in the quagmire of our own minds. We could also be in this state. And that's why the Ramchal beautifully says, he says, Hare kivan shetzarich labor mizel lezeh. Anytime he says you undergo any change, tzarich she'aleh makom yetach berutam shua ma'avar sheben shtei tzavot. You need something, he says, it's not enough to not to find something. You need that point of meeting. You need, in order to go from one state to another state in your mind, in time or in place, you need that, again, to somehow fill that synapse with something. Someone just told me, she said, I still feel it's March. Now, the funny thing is that in August, I was saying I still feel it's May. But again, not to say like, it's almost as if time has stood still during Corona, right? That's what she was telling me. And I told her, I said, Chaval. Because really, where are we? We're being hashmashot right now. Again, we're not pre-Corona, we're not post-Corona, we're Corona. Again, we're Carmel right now. And we're in this in-between state, right? And that's part of what all the psychologists are saying is contributing to anxiety because we're in this unknown. But don't worry. And Chazal say there's so many unknowns. There's the unknown of your mind, but there's also the unknown in time, and there's the unknown in place. And Hashem created that way, right? Bein Hashmashot of Erev Shabbat. And that's where there really is this in-between state that you can't get to the other state without being here. You can't get to post-Corona without going through Corona. And the question is, what's post-Corona going to look like? So let's take a look and see that who's going to help us resolve these ambiguities. Who's going to bring us from one location and one time to the state of clarity? Eliyahu. And that's why Eliyahu is always, again, how do you know he's the transition figure? The next story in Tanakh, Eliyahu is always Bapetach, right? He's always neither here nor there. He's always in a Carmelite because he's always on Har HaKarmel, except when he goes to Har Chorev. And Hashem asks him, what are you doing here, Eliyahu? And Malach Apcho Eliyahu. And Eliyahu says, because I want you to destroy Am Yisrael already. And Hashem basically says, go back to the people. But Eliyahu's insistent. He stands at the opening of the Ma'ara. He doesn't go in, he's not here, not there. And what happens at the Petach of the Ma'ara? He experiences fire and earthquake and winds, and he realizes Hashem is not revealing himself the way that he revealed himself to Moshe at Har Sinai until Kol Dma Madata. Until he hears a very, very soft, or basically the sound of silence, right? To borrow Simon and Garfunkel. And that this sound of silence is what takes him to a state of resolution. When Hashem says again, Malacha po Eliyahu. And that's why in the Masechet Brachot of Gimel Amud Aleph, and we discuss this, there's also going to be Eliyahu Bar Petach to bring Rabbi Yosef, who's in a churba. He can't get over the churban, so he's living. He doesn't want that day to pass. So he stays in churba. He stays in churban mentality. And Eliyahu stays at the Petach to tell him, no, you should have come out. You should have davened at Tefillah Baderech. And Rabbi Yosef says, but then I would have been distracted by everyone. And Eliyahu says, who cares? Right? Basically, daven at Tefillah Kitzara. If you have to daven, I'm here to bring you from the inside to the outside, but not just geographically. I'm here to bring you from the past to the future. And you're so stuck in the past that you're not moving on to the future. Get over the Churban and start davening already for Binyan. Start davening for Geula. And we see this as well, and also by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Remember, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they're not here, they're not there. And it doesn't just mean that one Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is in the Ma'ara and they don't want to come out. And rather, and it means that they're in literally their own world, they take their clothes off, they're learning Torah, they're in the world of spirituality. So much so that what happens after 12 years of eating from a carob tree and a spring of water? What does this remind you of? Charuva, Ve'ena, who also ate from, and basically ravens and a spring of water. Eliyahu, right, by Nachal Krit. So very similarly, Eliyahu can relate to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a very extreme personality, and also someone living in this world of churva. So Eliyahu is the one who is going to come and stand at Pitcha de Ma'arata, also at the entrance of the cave. And he's going to bring him out. But who remembers what happens when he brings him out? He and his son Rabbi Eliezer, they're burning everything. So they go in for another year, and Eliyahu has to bring them out again. And this time, Rabbi Eliezer burns, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai repairs, until, here's the best part of the story. Again, in 1 second, again, we also find, source number 17, Eliyahu is also at the Petach of the Beit HaSurim of Rabbi Akiva, and he, after Rabbi Akiva is killed, is going to accompany Rabbi Yeshua HaGarsi to take him and to bring him to the next world. So again, he takes people from one zone to another zone in time and in place. We're going to get back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in just a minute. But we also know, and what's one of them? What's one of the items that is created in this twilight zone? Basically, Eliyahu's Ma'ara, the Ma'ara of Eliyahu that will take us through Bein Hashmashot. In other words, Hashem created confusion, but also created an antidote for confusion, namely Moshe and Eliyahu, which again, the Tefillah of Rachamim. Let's go back for a minute, and source number 19. What happens finally? And after the extra year, a bat kol comes out and says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Eliezer, get out of your ma'ara already. It's like time to transition. Nafkol kol hicha dahabe nachai Rabbi Eliezer. But again, anything that Rabbi Eliezer looked at was burned, and Habe Masi Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would look at and repair. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Amar lo b'ni dai la'olam ani v'ata. You know what? We can just live in this world that way. We balance each other out. You'll destroy, I'll repair. At that moment, take a look at this. It's so powerful. It was almost Shabbat. In other words, it's Bein Hashmashot. And they see a Saba, they see an older man coming, and he's holding 2 Hadassim, the Rahit Bein Hashmashot, and he's running Bein Hashmashot. It's a time of Bein Hashmashot, and Tosfot explains who's that Saba? Of course, it's Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi is running with 2 Hadassim. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asks him, what are these 2 Hadassim? He says, what do you mean? They're for Shabbat. One is connected to Zachor and the other is connected to Shamor. You don't need to balance the world out with destruction, with fire, and then repair it. You need to balance the world out, again, with Shamor and Zachor, with the positives and the negatives, but it's even more than that. You can balance all the Gashmiot, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that you don't like in this world, with the Ruchniot of Shabbat. And that's why Bein Hashmashot. And the world of physicality and the world of spirituality. And who's going to transition us? Eliyahu, Mr. Transition. Transition from day to night. Transition from Chorban to Geula. Transition from, again, Baal is God to Hashem is God. Transition from the Reshut HaYachid to the Reshut HaRabim through a Carmelite. And that's basically the whole idea, which is why, again, Eliyahu then appears, as we know, the Leil HaSeder. As Leil HaSeder is also the bridge, as we know, between generations. So not only is Eliyahu, based on Melachim Parak, why you see the man of transition, because take a look, he also passes through Chorban. He goes through the dry land. He basically, and is going to bring us back all the way, and he transitions from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. And then what happens? Right? He is always suspended now between heaven and earth. And that's the idea. And so much so that, and just like Moshe also, and we don't know where he's buried. We know he's buried, but we don't know where he's buried, right? Somewhere in between. And that's why Eliyahu, again, is going to be viewed still in Tanakh as Mr. Transformation from one state to another state. He's Mr. Transition. Where is the moment, and not just in time and not just in place, where's the moment and that one generation moves to the other generation? I always say, my mother has friends who are younger than she is, but they're not yet my generation, but they're like a generation older, right? And then, there's a generation in between myself and my children, but really meaning technically I say I'm one generation, my children are another generation, but really there's a generation in between, right? That's the Bein Hashmashot. That's where Eliyahu comes in. And what happens, because there's my generation and there's my children's generation, I don't totally get them, because I was only introduced to a computer, at the age of 10, whereas they were introduced to computers in utero, right? And I didn't know, right, what, WhatsApp was until like 2 years after they did, right? And the reason I'm sharing this is because there really is this confusion, right, where we don't meet. Eliyahu says, but you can. And children teach parents, parents teach children. And we know, when does that come? When does he come to make sure that we're going to bridge that gap? On Leil HaSeder. And that's why we also pour a cup for Eliyahu HaNavi, for him to come and resolve the confusion between the generations, resolve our misunderstandings, resolve, as we know, all the tensions that are deterring Geula from happening. And then Mishnah Berurah says, why do we pour a cup for Eliyahu HaNavi? Lirmoz sha'anu ma'aminim, shekashem shegalnu Hashem yitbarach miMitzrayim, hu yigalenu od v'yishlach lanu et Eliyahu l'bsarenu. Because we're going to need Eliyahu to bring us into a state of Geula. We need Eliyahu, as we see, because these arba kosot of Geula, we need one for Eliyahu levaser et hagula. Here we see how Chazal are coming to teach us a remarkable lesson, right? A lesson wherein we're told that when there is confusion, you want to know what confusion is? Bein Hashmashot, Carmelite, go back to Hara Carmel. Hara Carmel, that's the scene with Eliyahu. Go to Mr. Transition. Go to Mr. Confusion. And you know what Mr. Confusion Eliyahu does? He clarifies that confusion. He teaches us how to go from Mincha to the next state of Tita Kochavim, how to go Bein Hashmashot, how to pronounce Hashem Hu Elokim, how to get rid of those negative influences, how to immerse yourself in Achal Kishon and get back up. He's going to be the one to bring you from Galut to Geula. And therefore Chazal say, that's a Carmel, that's a Carmelite, right? A beautiful understanding of how you don't really appreciate the terms that Chazal are incorporating unless you understand Tanakh. So every shiur, we've been focusing on appreciating the personalities in Tanakh in order to appreciate the personalities of Torah Shebaal Peh. Now we see that in order to appreciate even not just personalities, but time zones and geographic zones, in order to understand time and place in Torah Shebaal Peh, you have to understand time and place and person in Tanakh. And then if you do, then you'll be more sensitive to time and place. Then you'll understand that Eliyahu is already giving us the keys and the and the means through which we can clarify the confusions of time and place. Bezrat Hashem. And if we take advantage then of these ambiguous times and places, if we can bring ourselves back to our own personal Har HaKarmel Corona, then we can use this time period to bring us to the state of resolution, to bring us to a state of clarification, to bring us to a state of Geula. Shavua Tov.
Wow.
Shavua Tov. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sani,
you.
Sani, thank you
you.
very much. I was supposed to dedicate this shiur to Mark's father's yortzeit, and his name is Chaim Eliyahu ben Zelig Yaakov. Shiur was so much into him.
Okay.
Toda rabba rabba.
Thank you.